title today is My Experience with Osho, Wild, Wild Country. So that's what the, okay, I'm going to turn this down a little bit. It's complaining about the quality. So it's my experience with Osho, Wild, Wild Country. So I've been watching the video, the documentary on Netflix, if you haven't seen it, the last couple of weeks, and really, really enjoying it. It's so wild, the story. So I don't know if you have seen it or haven't seen it. Maybe this will inspire you to watch it, but it's basically about how the commune in America happened and all the dramas that happened with it. And it brings into question the idea of the spiritual teacher and the abuse. Because I can see how any community that you gather together, any time that you gather a large amount of people together, there's going to be people that are not treated so well, there's going to be abuse of power, and then there's going to be people that are treated really well, and there's going to be, for them, not abuse of power. So there's going to be all different types of versions. And some organizations it will be worse. So if you went to this other one where they all ended up killing themselves, what was that called in South America? Something town. I've forgotten the name of it. And my personal feeling on it is that, yeah, it could be that the leaders of the organization had to have narcissistic qualities, so low empathy and more narcissistic qualities in order to enact something, and in order to enact that. And maybe that's true of a lot of the leaders in our society. And so I can see how the individual could be ignored and how abuse could take place. But I'm so grateful it happened. It freaking rocks. It's amazing. There's something like that happened, that they managed to take over a massive area and build a whole city. That is amazing. Blew my mind, that they could do that. And the American government was like, oh crap, because it's got all these things in the institution where it allows for people to govern themselves, which is amazing. I don't really understand it all in America. I don't think you can do something like that in England. And it freaking rocks that they just turned up to the middle of nowhere and they created a whole city. If you haven't seen the documentary, you really should watch it. It really rocks. Yeah. And of course there's going to be abuse in that. Of course there's going to be weird psychological dynamics that happen, because you're running thousands and thousands of people simultaneously. I think it was 100,000 people at one stage in the community. So you have to do so many weird things. There'll be so many politics going on. Just imagine the politics in your family, and then try imagine running 100,000 people. And the reason it is because everyone has different ideas of how they see the future going. And then most people are identified with those ideas, so they can't separate out those ideas from themselves. So those ideas are who they are. So the idea of kindness, they see that as themselves. Kindness is something that I have, and people have to be kind, or people have to be moral, or people have to be enlightened, and it's an identification. Whereas thoughts are thoughts, ideas are ideas, they come and go, and we don't really know what's right in the end. We don't really know what kindness is. We don't really know the right direction. There's something that appears in us, and we'll have attraction to some ideas and other ideas dependent on our conditioning and our genetics, but they're not who we are. They don't represent who we are, and they don't damage us if others don't believe in them. So if someone else doesn't believe in kindness, it doesn't damage you unless you're identified with the feeling. And most of the time, so say kindness, for example, Most of the time the identification happens with that because we're afraid of the opposite. We need others to be kind because we're terrified of darkness. So that's one part of it. Like, leading that amount of people is going to be complex and is going to be super difficult, and there's going to be fights, there's going to be arguments, there's going to be rebellions, there's going to be groups that split off and diverge. You know, just because they all have this idea of enlightenment doesn't mean they all have an idea of how you manage that amount of people. And everyone will have their own unique idea, but they'll make alliances, they will do all types of things with this idea of like, oh, because it's an enlightened community, it's going to be different. How can it be different? The only time an enlightened community could be different is when people aren't identified with their ideas. So they'll still have ideas like, this is my preference, but they won't be attached to it. They won't be using that idea as a sense of their self, as who they think they are. So I first came across Osho, you know, maybe in the early 2000s, but I went to his commune in Pune in 2007, the first time, and it's actually where I met Roger Castillo, who was my teacher. I went there because I was in India and I was listening to Ramesh Balsekar in Mumbai, which is close to Pune. It's like 4 hours train journey. And what happened was I ate some grapes off the road and I didn't wash them well enough. And I got so ill. I had to go into hospital. Water was coming out the front end and the back end simultaneously. If you can imagine that, just different colors. It was a disaster. So I went into hospital for like a week because I was so ill. It really got me. And then after that, I just couldn't bear being in anything dirty. And I'd heard all these times these reports of Osho Ashram and how clean it was. And so I decided to go and stay there for a little period of time. And I ended up staying, I think, like the first time, like maybe 6 weeks. And like, it's quite controversial just entering, because just entering you have to take, or you did then, you had to take an AIDS test. It was like a click on your finger, and if you had AIDS, maybe you weren't allowed in, I don't know, or you had to wear a sticker. I can't remember. And then you go in and they do lots of different groups. So they have teachers there and you can join different groups. Like there was Mystic Rose, like chakra meditation, dance, like I can't even remember all the different groups. And then you pay and you sign up to do these different groups. And then you pay daily to go into the ashram, like a resort. And there's also free stuff that goes on as well. And I remember, like, so by this point I'd done meditation, I'd been involved in the foundation of the Western Buddhist order. I'd done a lot of meditation, a lot of Buddhist groups. I'd studied a lot of Nonduality, I'd read lots of books. But I don't think anything prepared me for what I found at Osho Ashram. I'd also done a lot of LSD by that point as well, so I was quite open-minded. But I went into Osho, and on my second or third day, somebody convinced me to go to a taster group. So I went to a taster group with them, and I went in and they locked the door, and then everybody had to behave like a baby. So you had to go around pretending you were a baby, like goo 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 goo, beep 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 beep. My name is Lisa, and I'm gonna play with this toy. And everyone had to pretend, to be a baby. And you had to the idea of it was to get, I suppose, into your like baby mind or your child mind, and just like really act it out with no shame, and like really accept it and really go for what you want. And so there'd be babies there that wanted their diaper changed, or they wanted to play with the girls, or the girls didn't want to play with the boys. There was all these things that went on. And I just wasn't prepared for that. Like, and I couldn't get out because they'd locked the door. So you're in there and you have to do it. And I was a bit averse, I think, but I was also like finding it very amusing, because it's like, you go in there, everyone's acting like a serious Westerner that's into meditation and enlightenment, and then suddenly the teacher, rings the bell and everyone's saying that. and acting out all this baby stuff. I didn't go on and do that group, and I think I was a little bit averse to it, but I was open. I was like, yeah, if they want to do that. And I was maybe a little bit snooty, like, yeah, but there is nothing. Like, we don't need to deal with the human stuff. So then I was there for a month. I did some groups. I didn't do that. I did a lot of dancing and some angel healing stuff and tarots. I didn't do that. And then I met Roger, and then I came back with Roger a few months later. I think we went there a few more times, but we went there together, me and Roger. We went there together for a month. And then Roger like really broke my mind open to what they were doing. Like, so I did a group there. I can't remember what it was. It was something like reading minds, or I can't remember. Maybe not reading minds, but telepathy. And we were in a massive group of about 40 people, and just by chance, it was a circle, and I was stood next to the teacher. And so he said, what we're going to do is everyone has to say their name, say something about themselves, and then the next person has to say their name and the person before them's name and something about themselves. So when you're at number 10, you have to remember 10 names and 10 things about that person. When you're at number 20, you have to remember all the 20 names prior to you and the things about them, and then at 40. And so I was the last one. I had to remember 40 people before me. And so I think this group was about telepathy, or I can't really remember, but it was about like opening your mind up to all possibilities. And so I was stood at the end and was like, oh my God, inside, I can't do this. Firstly, all the names aren't English. Like if they were English names, that would be easier for me. But firstly, they're not all English names. And secondly, with my dyslexia, I'm never going to be able to remember that. So I said to the man, and apparently he was like Osho's doctor. I think he was in the documentary. I did remember thinking, oh, that was him, but I've forgotten now. And so I went to him and I was like, oh, excuse me, you know, I have dyslexia and foreign names are very hard for me. And I think, you know, putting me right at the end is going to be, you know, quite stressful on me. Do you think I could go towards the beginning? And then he sort of looked at me like, really? And then he's like, hold up everybody, can everyone just listen? This lady here is saying that she's got dyslexia and that she's a retard, and because of her retardation, she has to go at the beginning because she can't remember everyone's name. And then for the rest of like 5 days that we did the course, like every insult about stupidity, retardation, like everything you could think of about dyslexia, he called me. And I remember like after the first day, like I kind of had one sense that he, you know, it's like a challenge of the ego, and it's like my identification with dyslexia, and he made me go at the end. So he then made me stand there and try and recall 40 people's names. And if anyone's watched my videos, they know like how shite I am at names, especially non-English names. And I remember like, so I had a sense of that, like it was challenging the ego. But then I think I had like a breakdown in front of Roger, like on the second day or something, just like feeling very broken by all his insults. And Roger like pointed out to me my ego and my attachment to self and my attachment to the idea of dyslexia and like my shame around it. And it ended up being so profound, like to have somebody in front of a group of 40 people. I know it might sound awful to most people and re-traumatizing to some. I'm sure like therapists, like psychotherapists and therapists would think it was terrible, but it actually like really brought it out of me. Like, and I really got to confront it in front of the whole group. You know, we'd say these things and I'd just start wailing. And I really got to confront like these years of the suppression in the education system and the ideas that I thought about myself. And it was so healing. But I can imagine that other people, especially in the therapeutic community, might see that as like abuse of power. And they might label it all types of things and think it was negative. But for me, I found that really beautiful. I found going into the lion's mouth like helped bring out these ideas in which I was pushing down in my body. And at the same time, I was also going to this masseuse who did like really intensive body massage. And so it was like really coming out of my body. And I was very grateful for the teacher doing that, and so brave that he was to do that. I mean, most people wouldn't do that because they'd be terrified of being sued. I know he has Osho behind him, but so brave of Osho to do all these things. Like in the end of the documentary, they say that Osho got killed by the American government. Some think it's an inside job. All these different ideas. But it's so brave of these teachers that go out and do these types of things. Like, can you imagine the first time Osho like encouraged that type of therapy? I mean, I know that Osho does really, or in the past did really experimental things, you know, like acting out sexual abuse, all these types of things. And what it actually did for myself is made me want to act out traumas rather than just talking about them, or and this is through my own exploration. I'm not recommending it to you because I don't want you to come and sue me, and this is recorded on YouTube. You do whatever you feel. It's all God's will in the end, but you do what you feel. But for me, like acting it out, like I acted out traumatic sexual things with people in a more conscious environment. I acted out like these traumas around my dyslexia. I acted out these abuses of power, all these different things, and I tried to do it from both sides. So I was the perpetrator and then I was the victim, and I watched things to encourage it, like movies, documentaries, you know, and like really like shook up my system, like really, like, so I really knew what it was like to be the abuser in all those situations and to be the victim. Like I really pushed myself to the limit, and still do, you know, if I have an issue, I still do. Like there's many things that I would love to tell you, but there's some part of me that still feels like it has to filter, because there's a little bit of nervousness of some energies that might come at me, and a little bit of nervousness of upsetting my family, like my mother. I have a mother. I mean, Osho was so brave. He did all these things and he had parents. It's so courageous. You know, we look at this and we don't really properly empathize with what it's like to put yourself out there, how brave it is, you know, to be stoned, potentially stoned by the public. Because when the public want to go for you, they will go for you in all types of manners. You know, somebody could take this video and edit it and put it on YouTube, you know, and make me look terrible. They could edit things together that I say. And people did that with Osho. Like you can hate people over gossip. You can even hate people over what they said taken out of context, not understanding what they're saying. Like all these ideas and these judgments. And for me, like part of my trauma release, and I still have traumas, but still now part of my trauma release, or part of my like getting in tune with it, is to act it out. So like the other day, I think I told this on the last stream, the other day, like I felt this energy of abuse inside of me. I don't think it was mine, but I felt this energy of abuse. So I went up to my partner, and he can really hold that. I'm sorry for talking about your partner. I know you don't like it. And I said to him, you abused me. He hadn't abused me, but I was like, you abused me, you know, and I let it come out of my body and like shake out of my body, you know, like really like as if I have been. And I think I learned a lot of that from Osho, and Roger learned that from Osho, and then taught me that he doesn't talk about it in his public streams. But yeah, like the goo 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 goo, I'm a baby. And I would act this out, you know, in my private life all the time. If I feel baby energy coming up in me, I'll go around being a baby. Like, who cares? We're all crazy. It's just that most of society are pretending they're sane. And so they're walking around in these tight jackets trying to fit into these straight lines because they believe that's what they should be. Like, they're insane. If aliens came down to this planet and looked at the way we're behaving, they'd be like, cuckoo, cuckoo, cuckoo. It's not like what everyone is doing in the mainstream is not crazy. It's just that everybody's used to it, so they don't think it's crazy. So walking around pretending to be a baby is most probably more sane, if that's what you feel like doing, more sane than walking into a cafe and pretending to be an adult. or pretending to be normal. Like, it's appropriate sometimes to do these types of things, but it's not to scare people and stuff. But yeah, I just really love Osho for that. And thank God Osho happened. He was a revolution in spirituality, a revolution. You know, he was the first major teacher that really promoted that you don't have to go and live in a cave in order to find freedom. So we get a lot of now like teachers that are talking about spiritual bypassing, or the dangers of cults, or the dangers of having this one teacher up there that has power. And I know there's a lot of teachers that would be very anti-Osho. And I can also see that from that perspective. Like, there is an element of abuse in it that you could speak of as well. But for me, thank God I met Osho. Thank God. Thank God that he had that personality. And thank God he surrounded himself with narcissistic tendency people that promoted him. I'm not sure if that's true, I'm just assuming, because that's normally the way it is. And then from the video. So if you haven't watched the documentary Wild Wild Country, go and watch it. It rocks, and see how it makes you feel. That's the most important. That I can feel when I'm watching. I can see all these elements of abuse, and I can see, like, you know, like things they do where you're like, guys, ladies, what are you doing? And but at the same time, there's this anarchist side in me that's like, loves it that it tried. Like, this creative side of me. And you see what your response is, because maybe if you don't, like, that's a condition, like this anarchist side inside of me. And if you don't have that, maybe it's very scary. And that's all that's important. There is no wrong or right. It's just our projections and responses onto things. It doesn't really matter what you think or not think. I suppose part of why I want to talk about this is because you see a lot of like anti stuff about gurus and anti-stuff and spiritual bypassing, and I can even get on that bandwagon and warn people. But then at the same time, I can also see its beauty and wonder and magic and creativity, and like evolution happens because of breaking rules. If evolution had never broken a rule, life would have never happened. Yeah. Nice. So that was very exciting. It's all a game.